All right, welcome back. So yes, we are discussing the increase in electricity tariff. It's something that concerns everybody. So, well, some describe it as they were shocked to have seen yesterday that that tariff is going to happen. But there are so many backstories to this one. So we've got a lineup of people to give their perspectives on what they think of this increase. We'll start off with George Tomi. He is a member of the board of DisCos. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. Well,
Good morning, gentlemen.
Okay, now with this increase in electricity tariff, well, many didn't actually see this coming. They were expecting a lot more interface before this were to happen. Some thought they were waiting to see messages from their distribution companies concerning this increase before they read in papers that is going to happen. So give us a background to this, what informed this one, especially months after they had said, hold on, have some consultation before you go ahead with the increase.
Well, if you recall, the DisCos have always clamored for what we describe as cost-reflective tariffs. This has been the basis for which the privatization was embarked upon. That has never been done, and for the last 5 years, there has not been any kind of tariff increase. That itself has led to a liquidity crisis in the entire sector. So the clamor has always been there. But in very recent times, when the regulator finally decided, okay, there should be an increase, consultations were made, public consultations were made, if you all recall, and it was actually meant to kick off in March. But unfortunately, the COVID thing came in, and everybody decided we should hold and see what was going to happen. And 3 months later, it was decided, okay, we might as well just start the regime. The problem is that the liquidity crisis is impeding investment in the sector. And the issue would be, when can you get the timing right? We agree that the best time to do something was like 5 years ago, but the next best time is today. For as long as we delay the increase or the right pricing, the more you will not have investment in this subsector. Today, we have the World Bank, we have the German government through the Siemens initiative, who are all willing now to support the sector. But they too will be deterred if they feel that the liquidity crisis will not be improved even when they begin to come with this support. So what they've now done is to allow what the government has now done through the regulator, of course, is to now allow for this increase. But then the increase is protecting the most vulnerable. And that is why you find that the tariff increase has been put into so many different bands. In a DisCos, for example, we have 5 bands. Bands A, B,
Before you move on to that bit, what about the condition precedents before this tariff were going to be implemented? Have the DisCos fulfilled that?
I don't know what you mean by conditions precedent, but
I thought NLC was talking about metering people, ensuring that enough consultation went on before you go ahead and increase that, because there's so many people who are still grappling with the estimated billing system.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. And for many of those categories, the tariff will be, first of all, there's a cap now on estimated billings to protect those class of consumers. And many of those fall into the bands D and E, who for now will experience a tariff freeze. There will be a massive metering program that's part of this entire tariff increase that will take place, that will be funded by a mixture of the central bank, the World Bank, and it is expected that metering should be concluded across the entire value chain in maximum 18 to 24 months. But before that time, the estimated cap methodology would apply. So those consumers are protected from what I call crazy billing. Now, with regard to all the other conditions, there was consultation. This is what I was explaining to you. If you recall, there was massive public consultation and we went back and forth. What you were referring to with regard to hold on was when the National Assembly got involved in it. And they felt, well, in the middle of a pandemic, why don't you hold fire? Try and move it to sometime next week. But the problem is that each month you delay the implementation, the liquidity crisis gets worse and you deter investors. The whole idea is that if you get more investors into the sector, it will create greater liquidity, Nigerians will get more power, economic activities will be boosted, and eventually earning power will also increase. This is the logic behind it. It's got to be done, and I think the time is now.
Well, Mr. Itome, I don't think anyone would argue whether or not it was something that needed to come, because this has been postponed, just as you have said, with all of the laws and regulations over the years about this. But when you say that there has been massive consultation, as a condition precedent, as Chamberlain said, how come the NLC and the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria are complaining? They are also consumers, they are customers of various DisCos, and I don't know if most of the people who are listening to you right now would agree that indeed they received any information that there would be an increase that will affect them.
If you go back to sometime in March, when the DisCos initially announced there was going to be a tariff increase, because this order to increase had actually been given to the DisCos since January this year. But just prior to implementation, there was this public outcry. And so NEC went on a nationwide consultation. That consultation happened. I mean, the fact that your viewpoint was not totally accommodated doesn't mean it didn't happen. You have to balance all the interests. The manufacturers want low tariffs so that it does not, it encourages them to do more manufacturing. That's understandable. And I'm sure there will be ways they can be accommodated. Labor naturally would want to fight for the ordinary citizen because they just feel that any tariff increase will create a problem. But the truth is, like I said, is that we are at crossroads. With COVID, with collapse in oil prices, there's simply no more subsidy available for the sector. And we really need to bite the bullet at this point. And that's why I said within this increase, there have been protection given to the most vulnerable consumers. There will be a tariff freeze for them. It will be those who, in any case, are more than willing to pay for electricity if they have it, that will, this whole tariff increase will begin with. And as this goes, we know that many of our consumer groups are already approaching us and asking for special arrangements. If you remember, Ikeja DisCo has this premium power that is given to its consumers, and they are paying a premium for it. Eko DisCo will have loads of representation. So it is not if
right.
Sorry,
understood.
Okay.
But I'd like to still talk about that consultation a bit, because it appears as though it was just, I mean, some will say that consultation was not successful because right after it, a lot of people are still kicking against it. So you wonder if that consultation was really successful in that sense. But, you know, talking about how this will work, because, I mean, that devil is in the detail, really. So you said that those in Band D and E would have, you know, their tariffs frozen, at least the increase frozen. But, you know, the public notice you put out still shows that their tariffs have increased. So I wonder, are you saying that it is just for maybe a few days or a few months and then it will eventually kick in? I'm not quite sure, because it's a bit confusing seeing that it increased in that public notice, but you're saying that it will be frozen.
Yes, let me explain to you how it works. This was I was trying to explain to you, that there are bands. And don't forget, we're talking about service reflective tariffs, which means what you pay is tied to the service you receive. So those in Band A expected to receive a minimum of 20 hours of electricity, for which they will pay X amount. Those in Band B, a minimum of 16 hours, C, a minimum of 12 hours, D, a minimum of 8 hours, and E, a minimum of 4 hours. Now, for bands D and E, their tariff at this point is frozen. So which means they will only pay the old tariffs until such a time as there is a power is available to be increased on a steady basis. We are moving towards a contract-based market. So if you do not receive power for the contracted period, you don't have to pay for it. The question would be, how do you know that? NEC has all our feeders from where we supply this power. All the feeders are metered and they are named. They're actually labeled. So if you are in a consumer group where you have contracted with the DisCos to receive, say, 20 hours, and averagely, and this is over a 2-month period, to receive only 18 hours, you're entitled to credit.
Yeah,
so
but Mr. Tommy,
based.
Pardon me to jump in here,
Yes,
because
please.
I mean there's issues that we need to clarify. But just to follow up on what you just said, so we don't lose that train of thought, is that you say that if you're supposed to have 12 or 20 hours of electricity and you don't have it, then certain things will happen in terms of compensation. But we all do know that even when they had capped me, and even the current existing regulations where they tell you you're not supposed to be the one buying the transformers, the poles, the metering, the wires. We know consumers they are made to buy these things, because if you have to wait to get these things, you could wait for ages. And so they go ahead and do it, and at their own cost. So when you then say that if certain things happen, you will get it, they say, look, from what has happened before, they don't see this happening.
No, Chairman, and this is why we must move from where we are today. The reason consumers were put under that pressure it's a direct cause of the liquidity crisis. Most of the DisCos didn't have the money to do that. And if you waited to be on the queue to do it, you will suffer for so long. But now, with this service reflective tariffs, the first thing that would happen would be massive investment in the sector, and people will begin to put money in. Don't forget, if I do not fix network,
I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand and follow your train of thought. Is it that, yes, they didn't have the revenue resources at the time, so now we'll have to wait until they accrue or gather the revenue accrues over a period of time before they can then begin to compensate customers?
It's not a gathering issue. It is a function of confidence in an economy. The banks who lend you money, or anybody who wants to invest in money, wants to look at where the revenue, the income is coming to support the lending. So, and the biggest deterrent to this were the low tariffs. Now that the tariffs have been adjusted, funding will be available. And in fact, what you will find coming in the coming days, and has in fact started with some DisCos, is that they're all going ahead, they're fixing their feeders, they're fixing their transformers, they're getting more in, and plenty of it will come. And don't forget, these will come on the back of facilities from the World Bank. The Siemens thing is also coming in. It will be from this.
Pardon me, there's just so much to follow up on when this is going on. Now, when you say that it's a tariff freeze for some others, but those who get premium supply, D and E, so A and B, perhaps C, if you get over 12 and 20 hours of electricity, you are supposed to bear the burden for those who have been frozen. Is that right?
Well, the problem is that it's called a cross subsidy. I mean, every market is based on a cross subsidy. Those who have generally support those who don't have. You see, that's not even the direction in which you should be looking at. Many people are willing to pay for power if they get it, because what it costs you in alternative generation is humongous. So many people will not complain, and that's why I gave you.
No, but Mr. Tommy, we can't assume that if I choose to spend whatever I have to provide alternative source of supply for myself, that's a choice. But if I am compelled to say, well, because you spend this, because of that, I have to spend this, I'm not sure that actually works that way.
No, Chamberlain, if you spend, let's go down to the numbers. If you burn diesel to give yourself electricity, you are spending around about 100 naira per kilowatt hour. Now, the highest band increase under this service reflective regime is in the neighborhood of about 60 naira per kilowatt hour. There is a huge difference of 40 naira per kilowatt. That is big money in any description. If you were a company or you were a big business, it goes to your bottom line. So that's the way you have to look at it. If you do not need to burn diesel, maintain a generator, blah, 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 some of that savings can go into this cost reflective tariff. You have peace of mind. And don't worry, don't mind about the noise pollution, the health pollution. We cannot accept burning, using generators as a normal and use that to make the argument. It's not normal, it's abnormal. Generators are what they're meant to be, absolutely and strictly standby. But today, they take center piece with all the damage that is attached to it. So we must move to an era in which we begin to have regulated markets. Service is based to pay, you can enforce rights. We've got to move away from where we are today. It's not a choice issue now.
This journey of moving really was quite tricky for a lot of people. So they were focused on blocking the cost reflective tariff increase. And all of a sudden it became service reflective tariff increase. And they're thinking, okay, wait a minute, what is the difference here? And, time and again, the NLC and the DisCos have tried to explain that it is for people that get above 12 hours. And on the other hand, saying that the poor will not be affected by this tariff increase. So when you hear that people that get below 12 hours will not be affected, and then the poor also will not be affected. So are you saying that it is the poor that get below 12 hours power supply? I'm wondering how the classification will work very well.
Let me explain to you how that works again. If you are in bands D and E, and these bands are usually based on where you live and your income capability and co. The idea is that there will be a tariff freeze. And when we say tariff freeze, it's just for some time. It's just to help you prepare for that time when service improves to your area, and then you have the ability to pay for it. But on the other people, for those who have always clamored, and there are people who have always clamored, just give me electricity and I will pay. Those ones, there's no point holding them back. Whether it's cost reflective, it's service reflective, it's a little bit of semantics. But the idea of cost reflective is that when a product costs a certain amount of money, you want to, in the minimum, ensure that you sell it for that cost. Each time you sell it below that cost, there is a subsidy element. And the federal government has been bearing this burden up till this point. And as I told you, on account of recent events, the money just isn't there to do it anymore. So for me, what is the point of pushing hard for subsidy when there are people who are willing, if they see the product,
so
they don't
how
want
do
the
we,
subsidy. Just
right. So pardon me. So how do we make this as clinical as possible? Because if you're saying it is based on area, you do know that you find some rich people staying in poor areas, pardon the use of that term, and you might find some poor people staying in rich areas. So if you lump them up, isn't that going to be challenging? I mean, it's just back to square one again.
No, it won't be back to square one. You see, there are feeders. The way electricity is distributed, there are feeders that serve all these areas, and all these feeders are specific to consumers. That's how I'm telling you that all the data is with NEC, just in case you don't trust the DisCo. So the separation can be done without too much of a problem. Perhaps what you may be worrying about is that there are some DisCos that cover very large territory. For example, some DisCos have 4 states that they cover, and where perhaps it's only in the major cities, the capital cities, that you have people with the ability to meet with these sort of new tariffs. And those who stay largely in the rural areas may be affected. Because don't forget, the remittances that are tied to the service reflective tariffs will also go up because we're all metered. So DisCos remittances are expected to go up as well. The discussions that are going on today from many DisCos is this: look, if today, for example, I was remitting my collection is 3 billion a month, out of which I was remitting 2 billion. Under the service reflective regime, my collection is expected to go up to say 4 or 5 billion. My remittance too is also expected to go tangentially. So the issue is the assumption that everybody can afford it. And if they can't, especially for those, like I told you, DisCos who cover large areas where for one reason or the other they cannot afford it, what is going to happen? Those are the discussions that are going on. And there are valid concerns. I believe they will be addressed. But the thing I'm saying to you here is that we are on the throes of massive investments coming into the sector. We should not keep those investments away because of this unsustainable artificial pricing of the product. This is where the argument should go. And everybody who is opposing it should look at the larger implications so that we move away from where we are today. It's been too much talk. Let's just get on with it. And as the challenges come up, we'll deal with it. But to remain where we are, stagnant, for as long as we've done, I really don't think.
Well, it is very important, Mr. Otomi, to get the structures right. I'm sure you will agree with that because, so Absolutely. On the one hand, you have your side, which is the people who are distributing the power to the consumers. On the other hand, is the consumers who, as we speak, if you check our social media handle and the Sunrise Daily handle, you will find out that they are complaining that they have not in any way been consulted with in any way, manner, shape, or form. So this is not the first time. I mean, you talked about remittances. We'll come back to that in a little bit. But this is not the first time we are having price hikes, tariff hikes, and all of that. How significantly will this affect power supply?
This is the expectation that once we start off with the regime, already, if you notice, power has improved. I don't know if you want to agree, you will agree with that, but power has actually improved because this has been done over a period of time. TCN itself is now...
Some might argue with you on whether or not power has improved. It perhaps depends on the location. There are people in various areas, yes, who will not even want to listen to you when you say that power has improved at all. So to the issue now, how significantly will this tariff increase affect power supply across board?
That's what I'm saying, that it will be incremental. And that's why you find that the tariff bands are also segmented. It will be incremental. So, as I said to you, TCN itself is willing in excess of 5,000 megawatts. Before that means improvement has taken place. Distribution networks have been improved upon, and more will come as the...
When you say incremental, perhaps it might be a good idea for us to have some kind of timeline, because we hear promises every day with no specific timeline. So what should we expect within how many months?
No, let me tell you how it works. If I sit here and begin to give you hard facts of no. For example, this tariff order we have, it's good until it is replaced, and which simply means that anytime anybody in a band, your supply goes up, the DisCos can apply to NEC for you to be moved to another band. It's a mobile thing. And because the DisCos make money when they give you power, it is in their interest to make the investment to be able to give you more power. What they trade in power, it makes no sense not to have power, not give it out. So it is a ramping up. There will be a ramp up. And that is what we should be looking at. We've just been stagnated by all these arguments for years. We just need to move the needle.
There's this memo that they're talking about as to a certain directive from the CBN about banks collecting electricity tariff. What's going on with that? What can you tell us about it?
We're working out the fine print. What is happening is that because, as I told you, remittances need to be made upstream. Remember how the value chain works. It starts from gas for the thermal plants to generation to transmission to distribution. Distribution is the last mile. They collect all the money. When you collect the money, you are supposed to then pay your bills. And your bills go through all the members to feed all the members in the value chain. There is market operator, TCN and Co., who must collect their money. There is NBET. NBET is the one today who aggregates all the power that's collected from the generating companies, and then through vesting contracts, they give it to the DisCos. At the end of every billing cycle, where the DisCos get bills from TCN, that's the market operator, and NBET. These must be paid for. Now, to guarantee payment, these banks have had to put up bank guarantees by Nigerian banks, which means if any DisCos is unable to pay, the guarantee can be called upon.
All right, Mr. Tommy, so just hang on a minute. We'll still come back to you for some more explanation, but we need to also quickly get on to the member of the Electricity Publicity, it's PEPCAN actually. He joins us by Zoom this morning as well. Good morning and thank you for joining us today. Well, I mean, just listening to all of this, Mr. Manuel Osage, I know consumers usually not happy with some increases, but what is your immediate thought about this tariff hike?
All right, thank you very much, my brother, and good morning, and good to be here this morning, and also good morning to Mr. Itome. We the consumers were not really happy. First, Mr. Itome talked about carrying the stakeholders along, all the stakeholders. I want to categorically state here that it's not all the stakeholders that were carried along, that were consulted in the increase of this tariff. Then moving forward, talking about the longer you use the power, the more you pay, does it mean that people in the rural area or the people you call the poor people or the how do I put it now?
Just hang on a minute. We need to just, we'll go to break and then, just a couple of adjustments. We'll be back in a moment. Don't go away. Welcome back. Well, let's get back to Mr. Emmanuel Osage, who is a member of the Public Electricity Power Consumers Association of Nigeria, PEPCAN. So, Mr. Emmanuel, could you go ahead and conclude your opening thoughts?
All right, thank you very much, sir. As I was saying for now, we at PEPCAN were not consulted. Then, moving forward, we're talking about the longer you use the power,
apologies. Well, it's not too clear. We need to adjust some things about the sound so that we could hear you a lot better. So the manager have to, I'm sure they're working on that behind the scenes. But we're also waiting on to get in another person to respond as well. Okay, I think we'll have him on, Mr. Joe Ajero. He joins us this morning as well. He is the president of the National Union of Electricity Employees, NUEE. And by the way, he's now the vice president of NLC. Good morning, Mr. Ajero, and thank you for joining us today. So we've seen some circular that you signed about electricity tariff hike and the position of the CBN. What's your grounds with it?
Well, thank you very much. You can see from what the CBN was trying to do that the CBN want to now ask banks to collect revenue from the power sector. To a very large extent, that portends lots of jobs for the sector. Unless the DisCos have mortgaged the sector, CBN and other commercial banks. Now, and we need a clear because of the incident. What that means that operators and those that are in accounts or revenue, will lose their job to banks. Who have urged that if banks must take over the sector, they should equally take over the issue of generation and transmission. They should become engineers to do the job. Because the idea of making the sector just a revenue collecting sector will not provide any service to the industry.
But Mr. Joe, let me quickly get your thoughts on this one about the tariff hike. Is the union happy with the process so far?
If you go back to history, you will notice that the union, prophesied what's happening now, that the privatize, Nigerians should witness this consistently too. And this is just the beginning of the increases that will come. But unfortunately, it is about a third or fourth tariff increase after privatization. It doesn't go with commensurate increase in salaries of workers in the sectors. So you see clear case of exploitation the DisCos and the players in the industry, even without tariffs to Nigerians. I don't see how the workers in the sector will accept it, that even when you are not increasing their salaries, they are equally paying higher tariff where they live. So it is not a good way that post anyone any good. In fact, there is companies sit in the type of knack. I suspect regulatory hijack in the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. I suspect it might have been hijacked by the DisCos, unless prove otherwise.
Mr. Ejero, I don't know what you think of. Well, permit me to take you back to the issue that you began with, and of course, both are related. Talking about the electricity tariff hike, this is not the first time. And the issue has always been with remittances, and which is why it would seem like the previous tariff increase hasn't really helped in the remittances, in the area of remittances to appropriate authorities, which of course was explained by Mr. Otome earlier in our conversation with him. Don't you think that the intervention of the CBN, getting the banks to collect on behalf of the DisCos, would help with the remittances so that this tariff increase can actually be meaningful?
Well, it depends on what you mean by remittances. I'm not sure that the clear remittance, because that was what led to the merger of the Niger Dam Authority and the Electricity Corporation of Nigeria around 1972-73. The DisCos cannot remit. They can't even give to the GENCOs what belongs to them. And when they were about privatizing, we stated the hands. So now to call the banks to collect the money and remit, when the DisCos will tell you they don't have enough money to work for them. It is already a statement before they privatize. That government intervened before you now had NEPA. That was what led to the margin of these two. But for them to tell us now in 2020 that that's the problem that led to the merger of ECN and Niger Dam Authority in 1977. I think Nigeria is not progressing. People are not thinking.
The issue you have, what exactly is the issue you have now with this whole, conundrum? On the one hand, you're saying that as far as you're concerned, the CBN, all the banks should not be involved in this, collecting the money from the consumers for the DisCos and on like that. On the other hand, you're talking about this electricity tariff and you say it's ill-timed. So where do we go from here? Because it would seem like, as you have heard from the DisCos, unless this tariff hike continues and goes on, significant investment in the power sector might be a dream.
Well, let me say this. My there. I'm not sure the DisCos have equally agree that the bank should get their money. So don't think that all is still there. That is one. Now the issue of DisCos promising that more investments will come because of more money to them. Lie. There will be no investment based on increase in tariff. It is not the case. And I'm not sure that even banks collecting money was part of their performance bonds. In the first instance, it wasn't. So you see, run here, people run there. The more money the DisCos, collect does not guarantee the more investments in the sector. The fact remains that even those people that those banks, those DisCos you are giving to, they are not solvent, and they will depend on collecting loan. And if you make more money, they pay more. They keep on servicing their loans. It's not true. And if you look at what they are calling performance, a service-based tariff, you look at it, they're taking the peak from 12 hours. You don't do such a thing, in a country where people are intelligent. Why don't you look at it from 24 hours a day? Those that take 24 hours a day will pay this money. Well, that's those that get 12 hours will get this. Now you are not talking of performance in the electricity sector based on 12 hours. That's unacceptable, my brother.
So what we wonder then, because earlier on in the year when the tariff hike was muted, you stood against it. But this recent one, I'm not exactly sure. Are you saying that you're against it and you will maybe protest and do the usual labor actions, or you wait to see how this pans out?
Well, in the first instance, the reasons for even postponing the last one or even sharing was clear. COVID. First and foremost, COVID. Two, metering. These two conditions are not yet met. Mr. President came up with a directive for massive metering, customers. And now you don't increase tariff before metering. It's not done. Two, the COVID we are talking of, which of the basis for resisting it in the first instance is no. And countries all over the world gave people tariff relief. And for Nigeria to now decide to increase tariff when other countries are giving tariff relief is still not acceptable. How will start Nigeria people? Because there's no justification for this increase now. Then service is not improved. You have not massively metered people, and COVID is still here. So on what basis is this tariff coming up now?
So are you saying that there will be a demonstration from labor or what? What's going to happen then?
You can see now that even as stakeholders, the National Union of Electricity Employees, which happen to be the General Secretary, neither NAC, the Regulatory Commission, the DisCos have ever consulted us. So we don't know what they're doing in the first instance. And it's secondly, as affiliate of the NLC, I happen to be the deputy president. Whatever directive they are giving, we participate in 100%. That's the situation. There are no two ways about it.
Right. So let's go to Mr. Etomi. You've raised a lot of issues now. One, Mr. Etomi, he says that they were not consulted and they are key stakeholders in the power sector. He also says that, this whole getting tariff increase does not mean that there will be more investment in the power sector. So if you could just start first with the consultation and talk about tariff increase and investment in the power sector.
As far as I'm aware, I know consultations took place. I don't know if the regulator, they have these town hall meetings and they then talk with specific groups, man and everybody. And so I'll be surprised. And in any case, consultation is a continuous thing. So whatever objections they may have, I'm sure can also be readily addressed, because in matters like this, it's not a one-day consultation, it's a continuous thing. You need to see matters from the other spectrum so you balance the issues that always arise over any type of increase. Now, on the issue of increase not translating to performance, like I told you, it doesn't make sense if the only product I sell is electricity for me not to invest in the sector. What has deterred investment in the sector was the low tariffs. I was being made to pay for a product that was collecting a product at below my cost. It created no incentive whatsoever to invest. But with the right pricing, I can see a clear sight of where my revenue will come from. It is in my interest to go and invest in it, and it will happen. And that's why I've told you that between the intervention from the World Bank, the Siemens initiative, there's going to be continuous flow of income into the sector. This is a sector that you must continuously, assiduously, and repeatedly, you must continue to make those investments. It's a continuous thing. Most of the networks we have are old, they were antiquated, 30, 40, 50 years. They need to be slowly replaced. But in the interim, you also need to get to areas that are underserved, as we call it today.
Okay. Well, Mr. one of the issues over the years, about this whole electricity tariff thing is not the tariff itself, but it's in collection, which was the reason that the president ordered that there should be a metering for as many millions of people who are electricity consumers all over the nation as possible. So without metering, we will still have that challenge of collection of revenue for DisCos. How are you addressing that?
Now, on the metering side of it, as I told you, the metering is tied to, that's the irony of it. My ability to meter you is tied to the tariff, because the investment that is required for metering.
I don't understand.
So,
I thought when you heard Mr. Ajero say the other time that metering should come before the tariff increase. So if you increase tariff and you're not able to collect it, there's a problem, don't you think?
No, it's holding on. It's like saying, do I train for a race before the race starts, or should I just wait until it starts before I start training? That's not the way it works. The truth is that metering investments are tied to tariffs. The investments will only happen if the tariffs are right. Now that the tariffs are right, the investments will come in. Now, to protect those, and Mr. Jerry is correct and right to protect those who are vulnerable and who won't be metered, there is now a ceiling, because those who are not being metered were being estimated. There is now a cap on estimated billings. There is a methodology to protect them. They may even come out better off than if they had meters. So that fear has been catered for. But part of this new market we're moving into, there's going to be massive metering between the World Bank and the CBN. They're providing funds to meter asset providers. And I'm sure you read recently that the federal government has actually waived duty applicable to meters, so that these meters can come in the numbers we expect and then deployed massively. All these would happen. There will be a beehive of activities. I share Mr. Jero's concern.
Just one moment, Mr. Tommy. All these issues that you are raising and the way you're talking about sound salacious, but we would like very, very much to have a timeline to it. But let's take this to Mr. Emmanuel Osage, who is a member of PEPCAN, and began his conversation. Let's hope we can hear him better now. So, Mr. Osage, could you tell us, well, you've heard over and over again that Mr. Tommy has said that there was massive consultation. What do you say about that?
All right, thank you very much. First, I will still categorically that we don't have confidence in DisCos. But this is not the first time matters like this will be arising. What I expect them to do is to give us the power, supply the power. The power is
it's not still very, very clear. Just we hope we can sort this out, in good enough time. So let me take it back to Mr. Tommy. So it's important for us to be able to get some kind of timeline for you. You have said over and over again, there's going to be a beehive of activities. The president has said, let there be metering across board. He knew that there is a need for the tariff increase, but he said, let metering come ahead. That is why, of course, the NERC also gave out those conditions that are right there on their website. I'm very sure you are also aware of it. Those conditions, there are just 3 of them. The number 1 is that there needs to be metering adequately. Get meters to people, consult with people, get meters to them, and promise quality of service. This has not been done to as far as so many people are concerned. And it will be good for us to hear some timeline, at least from your own company.
Well, like I told you, you have to start something. If you begin to say, this before, the burden has been on the federal government to subsidize the sector. Investors are not investing to subsidize a sector. So for as long as we go on this track, it will not happen. We will remain stagnant. What we should now do is, the template has come out, is a service reflective regime, which means consumers are not expected to pay for service that they do not receive. That's one first line of protection. The meter asset provider program, was put in place to ensure massive metering. It faltered when those of them who had imported meters were slapped with duty at the ports. We made the complaint. The federal government took it on board. and they've now come up with a waiver. First of all, the meters that are stuck in the port will now be released immediately, and more orders can be made. So side by side with this, the metering program will progress. Third is the huge investments that are coming in via the Siemens initiative and the World Bank support, and even our own CBN. The truth is that you don't need to beg us anymore to get things done, because COVID has been a reality check for every one of us, government, citizens, everybody. We need to prioritize a sector that holds the key to the diversification of this economy, and that's the electricity industry. So all hands are on deck, and I really urge and agree, if there has been poor consultations, that can be fixed. We can still meet, but I think we must all agree that remaining where we are today is not an option, so that we can move ahead and create the environment in which Nigerians can begin to work. People, welders, and your regular SMSEs, what do they experience? They spend so much money on generators, on petrol, diesel, petrol and diesel, and so many of these things. We need to eliminate all that so that their efforts go towards the product that they are selling.
All right, Mr. Tommy, let's take this to Mr. Jero now, and get his further thoughts. Now, when things like this happen, a lot of people look to the regulator, in this case, the NERC, and I know you've had some strong words for NERC in the past. At some point, you said the NERC was seeming like a tormentor in chief. And I'm just thinking, in this whole process, looking at the NERC, what areas do you think they did well or otherwise?
Well, I think that the NAC has seen itself as working for this, not for the masses of this country. And you have to separate these two. If they are working for the DisCos, there will be emphasis on increase in tariff, and then a subsidy. Now, take it back a little. You discover that what's the difference between subsidy in the private sector and then government ownership of the sector? Because we are told that the private sector will come in and government has no business in business, government doesn't have money, and the private sector will come in with their money and invest in the sector. But let me say this, the so-called subsidy in the power sector has gone higher than what government was spending under NEPA. Subsidy is now something that is higher than ownership. Now, with that in mind, you start to look at if the injury it has inflicted on people. Government is subsidizing with higher amount of money was given to NEPA. Then Nigerians are probably paying more money into the same sector. I think there's need for us to have a kind of review on this issue, because it doesn't add up. Government is giving more money than when before it sold it. Now Nigerians are paying more money than before they sold it. Now you start to ask yourself, what is the meaning of the appropriate, tariff? What is the meaning of low tariff? Who determines it? What are the factors that determine?
No, specifically now, in what areas really is government subsidizing and paying too much? Yes, we understand now that consumers will have to pay, but talking about government, what are those areas really, specifically?
Well, you understand that government has given subvention of over 1 trillion in the last few years. Now, secondly, government is supposed to be is supposed to be controlling 40% of the investment in the power sector. And between that time and now, government does not have any board in these areas. One, no dividend has been declared for government's 40% ownership of this sector. Meanwhile, government is paying in trillions, as subsidy and as a subvention to the sector. I think in every ramification, in every way of it, the government has been paying. Nigerians have been paying.
Okay, let me ask Mr. Tommy pointedly some of the issues you raised. Now, if, as it says, government still has 40% stake in the DisCos, why should there still be cross-subsidy? Because people are struggling to wrap their heads around that.
First, and foremost, let me make one clarification. The government has spent subsidized with 1 trillion, 1.7 trillion. You must understand that the value chain starts with gas. 60% of this cost is gas. It's not money that has gone to the DisCos. We better be very clear about that. The gas regime, which is upstream, is also subsidized. Gas is not being priced at international price. So they have issues. And from time to time, when the grid collapses, it's because the gas producers have refused to supply gas. Let's get that very clear. Then there is the issue with the generation. Generation 2, you pay for capacity, you pay for energy. And the cost there too is at below, the price at low cost. So those subsidies have gone to address the supply end of it. Let's be clear about it. Anytime people say subsidy, they think the money was put into the pockets of the DisCos. The only role the DisCos play is that at the last mile, so they collect the money, and that money is then sent up the value chain, less their cost of operation. And the reason why there are no dividends.
Okay, just pardon me.
Explain.
Okay, my apologies. We have Mr. Emmanuel Osage. We've been trying to get him on to say a thing or two about consumers and consumption. So let's let him in, and then hopefully we could come back to you. My apologies for butting in at that point. Mr. Osage, could you please go ahead and respond quickly?
Yeah, thank you for having me back. All right, as I was trying to say, we do not have confidence in DisCos based on past experiences. Because the past experience we've had with all these promises have taught us this. And also, it should be for the power first, not the tariff first. Let there be power, then the tariff can come in. And then you are saying the longer we use the power, the more we pay. Meaning, even the local people, the people you call the poor people, will not even have power supply at all. Because they don't have money to pay. They cannot pay. And then another point is this. Look at houses that have no meter. They are the one that is even suffering it more. Even these tariffs we are talking about, they are the one that will pay higher. Reason being that you will just look at a building, because it's 4 flats, you will say, okay, you are paying 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, and no meter. How do you read that? How do you justify all these actions? We are not happy with it. It's not going down well with us. Even PEPCAN, talking about the consultation, not all the stakeholders were consulted. Like even PEPCAN were not consulted, and some other stakeholders too were not consulted. We really need to look into that. Thank you.
All right. Pardon me. Mr. Tommy, could you, we're winding down now. In addition to your response, albeit briefly, tell us as well, what is appropriate pricing for the power sector?
There is, what is appropriate pricing in the minimum. In the minimum, the tariff should match the cost of the product. So if it costs you, for example, 50 naira to produce a good, it doesn't have to be electricity, and you want to, assuming you don't even want to make a profit, in the minimum, you should be able to sell it for 50 naira. But if you have to, you are by regulation, because we're a heavily regulated industry, you are told, please don't sell it for more than 30. There is instantly a 20 naira gap. That is a subsidy everybody keeps talking about. It's not caused by the DisCos. It's caused by the policy. And when we had the privatization, no investor would have put in money into a deliberated loss-making venture if the contract we had did not say we will move to a cost-reflective regime. All the promises made upon privatization were not honored. And I'm sure you are not new to the constant battles we've had with the regulator and the federal government. So to say the DisCos have captured the regulator, it's unfortunate. We've had a constant battle. Even with this service reflective thing, we are meeting on a daily basis to smoothen this.
Clearly, this conversation might never end, and it's an ongoing one. But just one more thing. A lot of people are asking, what happens to those that experience one day off, one day on, power supply? Will that apply to them also?
Yes, that's what I'm telling you. It's an average. It's an average over a period of time. You're expected to get X number of hours supply, say over a period, 2-month period. It is averaged out. And it is what you get that you pay for. That's the point I'm making. So people are protected we are not totally happy with it. We would have preferred a straightforward, whatever is available, I give and I charge for it. But what the regulator is saying, no, provide this service and get paid for it. And he's now giving me strict margin orders. In fact, for me to be able to earn, especially from those bands that are going to be paid, I have to make those investments. I have no choice. Once they clean up my balance sheets from all the past distortions, the bank will be out, the DisCos will be out there again. They can borrow, they can put the investments because now they see a clear sight of where the revenue is coming from.
Okay, well, it's I mean, this kind of conversations, they never really end because there's so many questions about metering, estimation. If I get 10 hours a day and the next day I get zilch, how come my average will classify me as above, maybe within C, and then I get to pay premium? So many areas. There are big questions too for the NLC, perhaps the gas company as well. But gentlemen, we have to thank you, Mr. George Utomi, Emmanuel Osage, and Joe Ajero. Thank you all for talking to us this morning. All right, then, we're back in just a moment. Join us again.